I'm Christopher, and you are in Animal Attacks. And today, I'm breaking down the most deadly animal attacks ever recorded. From a newlywed bride being lifted into her husband's arms for the final photo of their honeymoon, turned fatal to a fisherman paddling alone at dawn over a shallow sandbar, never seeing what was rising beneath him. It was June 17, 2016, and the golden light stretched across Keauakapu Beach in Maui, where the seabed sloped gradually before meeting darker reef structures farther offshore. Those deeper reef zones were patrolled by tiger shark, whose movements brought them periodically into shallower water as daylight faded. Elira Santos, 28, a dental receptionist from Albuquerque, had never traveled abroad before. With her husband Jonah, 31, a cautious HVAC technician she had saved meticulously for their Hawaiian honeymoon. Just 3 days into their marriage, they splurged on a Sunset Beach photo shoot with a freelance photographer who offered discounted rates for off-peak slots, promising romantic shots in waist-deep water, a comfort for the couple, neither of whom were strong swimmers. I don't know about you, but knowing that deeper reef structures sit just beyond the shoreline always gives me pause. Tiger sharks are among the ocean's most adaptable predators, with adults reaching lengths of 10 to 14 feet and capable of exerting immense bite force, sufficient to cut through bone and hard shells. The photographer positioned them several yards from shore, in calm, shallow water, where the depth reached waist level. At that distance, most people would assume they were completely safe. Elira's flowing white dress created an ethereal effect as it floated around her legs, and Jonah had overcome his initial awkwardness about posing for professional photos. The session had been progressing smoothly for nearly 15 minutes when the photographer suggested more dynamic shots involving splashing and movement to capture the golden light reflecting off disturbed water. Several beachgoers had stopped to watch the romantic scene unfold, some taking their own photos of the picturesque couple. What none of them realized was that a tiger shark, measuring roughly 12 feet in length, had been methodically hunting along the reef edge since late afternoon, following its instinctual pattern of moving into shallower waters as daylight faded. Their repeated splashing and the contrasting movement of Elira's white dress against the darker water created exactly the type of irregular disturbance that triggers investigative behavior in tiger shark. Now that part really stands out to me. The attack came without warning as Jonah lifted Elira for what was meant to be the final shot of their session. The tiger shark surged upward from deeper water, propelled by rapid tail strokes as it crossed from the reef edge into the shallows. The impact threw Elira off balance, and the shark's jaws closed on her left hip and upper thigh. The photographer witnessed the sudden strike. Though there was no warning before the predator's attack, the shark's serrated teeth tore through the thigh and pelvis, causing catastrophic damage and likely severing the femoral artery. Elira's scream was cut short as the force of the attack pulled her underwater, and bleeding began immediately from the inflicted wound. Jonah's initial confusion turned to horror as he realized what was happening beneath the churning surface. He lunged forward, grabbing Elira under her arms and attempting to pull her away from the shark, but the predator's grip was absolute. I can't imagine what that moment must have felt like for him. The surrounding water darkened rapidly with blood as the shark released its grip and moved back into deeper water, leaving Elira in the shallows with critical injuries. Elira emerged from the water unconscious, her body going into immediate shock from catastrophic blood loss. Jonah dragged her toward shore, screaming for help as blood poured from the massive wound in heavy, pulsing streams that left a trail across the sand. An off-duty firefighter among the beachgoers rushed forward with towels, attempting to apply pressure to the wound, but the injury was too high on her torso and too severe to control with basic first aid. The femoral artery had been completely severed, and her body was losing blood faster than any emergency response could address. A witness called 911, but traffic delays meant paramedics didn't reach the remote beach access for several minutes. Elira had lost consciousness shortly after reaching shore and went into cardiac arrest soon after. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead from hypovolemic shock, secondary to massive trauma and blood loss. I can't help but wonder if stricter guidelines for offshore photo sessions might have helped. Elira and Jonah were careful, inexperienced swimmers, yet the unpredictability of tiger sharks makes me question how preventable this truly was. The incident prompted immediate beach closures and increased patrols over several days, drawing widespread media attention, though many details were later limited or removed from public reports for privacy. The photographer ceased offering ocean sessions and returned exclusively to land-based wedding photography. The couple's carefully planned dream vacation had lasted exactly 4 days, ending in the type of tragedy that transforms a paradise destination into a place of unimaginable loss. It was August 15, 2014, and the ancient ice of a glacier stretched across Alaska's temperate wilderness like a frozen river of time, constantly calving into the lake below. The retreating ice had exposed rocky moraine and emerging vegetation, creating prime foraging habitat for brown bear preparing for winter. Celeste Moorhead, 44, arrived at the glacier viewing area that morning as part of a desperate attempt to repair her fractured relationship with her 19-year-old daughter Emma during an Alaskan cruise excursion. A real estate agent from Phoenix, she had spent years watching her only child drift away, their relationship strained by boundary violations and attention-seeking behaviors. Colleagues knew her as domineering, successful professionally, but personally toxic. The trip represented Celeste's last attempt to prove she could change, though arguments over control of the itinerary had already begun. Her daughter had reluctantly agreed after months of guilt-laden calls, but their tentative reconciliation was fraying under Celeste's need to document every moment for social media validation. The glacier viewing area sat surrounded by dense rainforest, where spruce and hemlock trees provided cover for Southeast Alaska's brown bear population. Alaskan brown bears can exceed 1,500 pounds during peak season, with females averaging around 500 pounds. They can accelerate from standing to high speeds within seconds when defending cubs. Their massive claws and powerful jaws evolve to catch salmon and eliminate threats to their offspring. Park naturalist Jacinth Marinin had begun her standard wildlife safety briefing by informing the 20-person tour group about a female brown bear with 2 yearling cubs spotted that morning near the glacier viewpoint, approximately 400 meters from the visitor center. She emphasized the critical importance of maintaining at least 100 yards distance from all bears, explaining how sows with cubs represented the most dangerous encounter scenario due to their hypersensitive protective instincts. Celeste interrupted Jacinth's safety presentation multiple times, loudly dismissing the warnings as overblown liability protection designed to limit tourist experiences. When the group spotted the sow and her cubs through binoculars at approximately 150 meters distance, Celeste pushed to the front and announced her intention to capture real photographs rather than tourist snapshots. Both Jacinth and Emma pleaded with her to respect the safety guidelines, but Celeste exploded in fury, screaming that she was paying good money for this experience and would not be controlled by government bureaucrats who clearly did not understand her needs as a paying customer. Despite increasingly desperate pleas from Emma and direct orders from Jacinth to remain on the marked trail, Celeste stormed away from the group toward the foraging bears. Emma's tears and Jacinth's radio calls to park headquarters went ignored as Celeste marched across the rocky terrain with her digital camera extended. Celeste approached the sow foraging while her cubs played nearby on the glacier-polished rocks. The massive bear immediately detected the threat, rising onto her hind legs and huffing a clear warning to retreat. Celeste continued forward with her camera raised, either failing to recognize or deliberately ignoring the unmistakable signs of an agitated mother defending her young. A brown bear sow protecting cubs doesn't just attack, she eliminates threats with extreme prejudice. Her attacks are designed not to wound, but to neutralize completely, often continuing long after the threat has stopped moving. Celeste had just triggered every maternal instinct evolution had hardened into this 500-pound killing machine. The bear responded defensively, advancing toward Celeste and making physical contact. She fell onto the rocky terrain and sustained multiple injuries to the head, neck, shoulders, and upper torso, including puncture wounds and lacerations from the bear's teeth and claws. During the encounter, the bear maintained contact for several minutes while attempting to neutralize the perceived threat to her cubs. Celeste's movements toward safety were hindered by the injuries sustained, which included deep tissue trauma consistent with defensive behavior by a large mammal protecting offspring. Celeste became unresponsive as blood loss, shock, and blunt force trauma affected her condition. After perceiving that the immediate threat to her cubs had ended, the bear retreated with the cubs toward the surrounding tree line. Tour guides immediately radioed local emergency services. First responders arrived by helicopter, but Celeste had already died due to the severity of the injuries and hemorrhage. The coroner's examination confirmed extensive puncture wounds and lacerations to the head, neck, shoulders, and upper torso, consistent with a defensive attack by a brown bear. Death was determined to be caused by traumatic injuries, blood loss, and shock. Regional wildlife authorities concluded that the attack was a defensive response, triggered by human proximity and violation of established safety protocols. The bear family was monitored but not relocated, as their behavior was consistent with natural maternal defense. It was August 19, 2013, in Hwange National Park, Zimbabwe. The early morning sun glinted across the open savanna, and the Ngamo Plains stretched wide and dry. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant waterholes. Oisin Gallagher, 44, an Irish geography teacher, had traveled alone to fulfill a lifelong dream of photographing African wildlife. Patient and methodical, he had joined a small safari group at Ivory Lodge and carried his prized Canon 7D with a 100 to 400 millimeter telephoto lens. Even I had planned trips for years and tried to be careful. Reading this makes me realize how a single moment can undo all that preparation. His guide, Tapiwa Moyo, 38, a professional with over a decade of Hwange experience, admired Oisin's discipline and noted his restraint around the animals. From research into safari incidents, I've learned that solo travelers who combine high enthusiasm for photography with large, unpredictable wildlife face situations where even small lapses can be deadly. That morning, the group came across a splinter herd of about 40 Cape buffalo, including several large bulls with fused bosses. Oisin photographed from the vehicle, noticing one massive old Daga boy standing apart, staring directly at the group. The bull appeared passive, moving with the herd, and this emboldened Oisin. Quietly, he opened the vehicle door on the far side and stepped out, crouching to frame a lower angle shot. He took 2 steps away from the vehicle to remove the wheel from his composition. Tapiwa noticed immediately and warned him to get back inside, but Oisin raised a hand and continued shooting. I think it's common sense that stepping out of the vehicle puts you at serious risk, no matter how experienced the guide is. The bull detected Oisin and reassessed the threat. Its ears flattened, tail lifted, and head swung back. In an instant, it charged. There was no hesitation. From what I've seen, it's easy to underestimate them, but those bulls don't bluff. They can charge incredibly fast, up to 56 kilometers per hour. Oisin had roughly 4 seconds from the moment he saw the bull to impact, a terrifyingly short window. The bull charged from behind, striking his lower back and left hip with the boss, hurling him against the side of the Land Cruiser. His camera flew from his hands, shattering on impact. The attack didn't stop there. The bull's right horn drove into Oisin's abdomen, tearing through muscle and puncturing his spleen. A second strike landed across his upper back and skull, fracturing vertebrae and causing catastrophic brain injury. The sheer speed and force of the assault left him with no chance to react. In less than 10 seconds, the entire encounter was over, leaving his body motionless and the injuries unsurvivable. Tapiwa radioed the lodge and authorities while checking for signs of life. Medical personnel arrived nearly an hour later and confirmed death at the scene. Emergency protocols were followed, but the speed and force of the attack left no chance for intervention. Oisin died from combined internal hemorrhage, spinal cord injury, and traumatic brain trauma. Research on large African herbivore attacks emphasizes that even seconds outside a vehicle can be fatal. Vehicles often remain the only barrier against charging bulls. The local wildlife authorities classified the death as a wildlife fatality, caused by exiting a vehicle in a restricted area. The buffalo were not harmed, and the guide was cleared of negligence, having followed standard protocols and warned the victim. Even I've been tempted to step out for a better shot, and Oisin's story reminds me how quickly one step can turn a controlled safari into a deadly moment. Staying inside the vehicle is the only reliable barrier. Once outside, the risk falls entirely on you. Guides can warn, but they can't stop a charging bull. His careful planning, undone by a brief lapse, shows just how fast wildlife encounters can become fatal. Oisin's memory card was recovered, preserving the final photographs of his lifelong dream. His body was repatriated to Ireland, and the funeral was attended by family, friends, and colleagues. His wife later donated his telephoto lens to a school photography club, keeping the memory card as a personal tribute. It was September 22, 2015, and the Ugandan sun beat down on the shrinking waterways surrounding Lake Mburo, where the dry season had compressed hippo populations into increasingly crowded channels. A small ecotourism operation offered morning boat excursions along a network of papyrus-lined channels, guided by locally trained operators. Beverlyn Treadworth was a 52-year-old property litigation attorney from Surrey, England, who had arrived in Uganda as part of a 3-week East African tour, organized through a London-based safari company. Treadworth's travel companion, a university friend, had quietly switched to a separate room at the previous lodge, after growing exhausted by her behavior. Treadworth had already lodged complaints at 2 previous stops on the itinerary, one regarding bedsheet thread count, and another accusing kitchen staff of ignoring dietary restrictions. The morning excursion departed in a small motorized skiff carrying Treadworth, a retired schoolteacher from Bruges, and a 25-year-old operator named Kamuntu Bwayo. Bwayo, certified by the National Wildlife Authority, briefed the group that hippopods would be observed from safe distance. Certain channels were off limits, and his navigation decisions were final. Treadworth began complaining when Bwayo maintained roughly 50 yards from the nearest pod. She pointed toward a narrow channel approximately 150 yards away, where at least 12 hippos were visible, including calves. She instructed Bwayo to enter the channel. Bwayo refused. The channel was shallow, narrow, and occupied by a dominant male he had personally observed displaying aggressive behavior on 3 previous excursions. Entering in a small skiff would place them within the male's defended territory, with no room to maneuver. Treadworth told Bwayo she would contact the National Wildlife Authority to report his refusal. She informed him that her professional connections in international tourism could ensure this operation never attracted another European client. When the retired schoolteacher suggested trusting the guide, Treadworth told her she had not asked for her opinion. Bwayo held firm and began turning back toward the main channel. Treadworth stood abruptly, stepped toward the stern, and grabbed the tiller arm, wrenching the boat's direction toward the channel mouth and momentarily disrupting Bwayo's control. He pulled her hand away, but the sudden course change had already swung the bow toward the entrance. The engine noise and abrupt vibration carried across the water. Hippopotamuses are one of the deadliest large animals in Africa by annual human fatalities. Adult males weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds and can reach up to 12 to 14 feet in length. Despite their bulk, hippos move through shallow water by bounding along the bottom with surprising speed, fast enough at close range that a human cannot react in time. Their jaws can open extremely wide, exposing massive tusk-like canines with one of the strongest bite forces of any land animal. Territorial males become extraordinarily aggressive during the dry season when shrinking water forces pods into increasingly confined space. The dominant male surfaced roughly 30 feet from the bow. Its scarred head and massive jaw rose above the waterline, mouth opening in a full-threat gape. Bwayo cut the engine immediately and attempted to reverse and angle the boat away from the channel. The bull submerged. Seconds of silence. Then the animal surfaced directly beside the skiff, its massive head striking the gunwale with tremendous force. The impact buckled the thin metal, and the bull's jaws clamped down and wrenched, capsizing the skiff and dumping all 3 occupants into shallow, murky water. Bwayo grabbed the schoolteacher and hauled her toward the papyrus bank. Based on witness testimony, the bull charged through the shallows at devastating speed. Its jaws came down on Treadworth's midsection, biting and crushing before lifting and tossing her partially from the water with a violent wrench of its massive head. The bull retreated toward its pod. The attack lasted seconds. Bwayo and the schoolteacher remained hidden in the papyrus until the pod settled. His radio call brought a rescue boat after a significant delay. Beverlyn Treadworth had died almost instantly from catastrophic bite trauma. The investigation determined she had physically seized boat controls against the operator's refusal, momentarily disrupting navigation and directing the vessel toward a territorial male. Bwayo was cleared of liability. The incident was logged with the National Wildlife Authority. The operation temporarily reviewed excursion protocols and implemented reinforced tiller guards and a 2-guide policy. It was June 3rd, 2018. The Limpopo province of South Africa sits in the grip of a dry winter that arrives without drama and stays without mercy. By June, the vegetation along the dry riverbeds has thinned to the point where the bones of the landscape are visible. The pale sand of the riverbed, the skeletal thorn trees, the dense thickets of brush that line the banks and make movement through them slow and painful. As the temperature dropped, the light thermal flow that had been holding steady along the riverbed began to break down, the air shifting briefly and inconsistently. Ethan Cole was 34 years old, an American hunter who had built a following as a content creator, documenting his time in the field. He was not a beginner. He had hunted dangerous game before and understood the mechanics of leopard hunting. He was also a man for whom documenting experience had become as important as the experience itself, where the pressure to produce content that justified an audience's attention was a constant background factor. That pressure does not always manifest obviously. Sometimes it manifests as a slightly higher tolerance for risk, a slightly lower threshold for caution. I can see how that mindset could push someone into danger without them even realizing it. His hunting partner, Ruan Visser, was 42 years old, a South African outfitter who had been running leopard hunts in the Limpopo for nearly 2 decades. He knew the animals on his concession, individually, knew their habits and territories, and understood the particular danger of a leopard at close range in a confined space. The leopard is the most adaptable of Africa's large predators. It survives in environments that have eliminated lions and cheetahs, thrives in proximity to human settlement, and hunts with a combination of patience, stealth, and explosive speed that makes it, at close range, one of the most dangerous animals on the continent. A leopard that feels cornered does not behave like a cornered lion. It behaves like something that has spent its entire evolutionary history solving problems in tight spaces. And the solution it arrives at is almost always fast, precise, and directed at the most vulnerable point it can reach. The bait, an impala carcass, had been secured in a tree along the dry riverbed several days earlier. The ground blind had been constructed approximately 25 yards from the bait, low to the ground, partially enclosed, backed against a dense wall of thorn brush with a slight terrain drop behind it. The positioning limited the options for rear movement if the situation required it. The wind had been steady and favorable through the early evening. The bait had been hit the previous night, which meant the animal was comfortable with the site and likely to return. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the temperature dropped sharply. The thermal patterns collapsed, and the air became inconsistent, shifting, reversing briefly, then shifting again. The reversal lasted only a short time, but it was long enough. Human scent moved toward the bait site, and the leopard that had been approaching detected it and stopped. A leopard that detects human scent at a bait site does not necessarily leave. It begins a wide, cautious circle through the thickest available cover, attempting to locate the source of the disturbance. This circling behavior is well documented and is one of the reasons that blind placement relative to available cover is critical. A leopard circling a bait site will use every piece of dense vegetation available to it, and if that vegetation brings it behind the blind, the dynamics change in ways that are very difficult to manage. The leopard circled wide and moved behind the blind. It closed to within 1 to 2 meters of the back of the blind, still completely invisible in the darkness, still completely silent. At that range, with the thorn brush and the terrain drop limiting its options, its ability to withdraw cleanly without exposing itself was compromised. I can't imagine what Ethan must have felt, completely unaware that something that deadly was so close. Ethan heard faint movement behind him. The sound was subtle enough that he interpreted it as a small scavenger moving through the brush. He remained oriented toward the bait tree. The leopard was 1 to 2 meters behind him. Then Ethan shifted his position, a small adjustment, the kind anyone makes after sitting in a confined space. For hours, fabric moved against brush, producing a soft but unnatural sound. Synthetic material against dry vegetation, a sound that does not occur in the African bush without a human being present to produce it. At 1 to 2 meters, in the darkness, with limited escape options behind it, the leopard's response was immediate. It lunged through the shooting gap in the blind in a short, explosive burst. The distance was almost nothing. In the confined space, he could not fully shoulder the rifle, the barrel catching against the blind's frame as he tried to bring it up. He fired off balance and missed. The leopard made contact with his neck and upper torso, the attack brief and concentrated, and then disengaged and retreated into the darkness. I can't see how anyone could survive an encounter like that in such a tight space. Ruan arrived at the blind minutes later. Ethan Cole died from rapid blood loss before evacuation could be completed. The injuries to his neck and upper torso had damaged major vessels that could not be managed in the field, in the dark, at that distance from any form of surgical intervention. The leopard had not come to the blind to hunt Ethan Cole. It had come to investigate a scent disturbance and found itself unable to exit quietly. The attack was not predatory, it was defensive, the response of an animal that perceived itself to be cornered and reacted with the speed and precision that its biology had spent millions of years developing. It was August 18th, 2016. Neptune Islands, South Australia. A shark cage diving vessel running a scheduled excursion at one of the most active great white shark sites in the world. The session was approaching its final rotation of the day. A large female great white, estimated at approximately 5 meters, had been present throughout the session, making increasingly close passes around the cage and the retrieval equipment along the side of the vessel. Danny Mercer was 45. He had worked as a senior deckhand on the same vessel for 11 years. His role was on deck, managing equipment, operating the cage retrieval system, and keeping the session running. He knew the procedures well enough to have contributed to writing portions of them. 11 years of working around great white sharks without serious incident had normalized the risk in ways that were not visible until August 18th. I can't move past this detail. 11 years without consequence is not proof that the risk was manageable. What happened next proved that. The marine biologist on board had been logging behavioral changes throughout the session. The animal's circling pattern had tightened over the course of the afternoon. Passes were coming closer to the cage and closer to the hull on each loop. The captain had indicated they were running the final rotation before pulling the cage. The decision to wrap up was partly a response to the observed behavior. During the final rotation, the retrieval cable began sticking. It was a recurring minor mechanical issue on the equipment. Standard protocol during active shark presence required crew to maintain distance from the water edge and avoid manual intervention until conditions were clear. Danny leaned over the side of the vessel and reached down to manually guide the cable. He had performed the same action on previous occasions without incident. The shark had been moving in the direction of the cable for several minutes. Danny remained in position and continued working it by hand. The female made a close pass along the hull toward the retrieval cable. The cable movement at the waterline created a direct stimulus below Danny's position. He was leaning over the railing with his forearm near the water when the shark came up. The bite was a single upward strike, catching the forearm at the waterline. Crew members pulled him back onto the deck within seconds. He was clear of the water almost immediately, but the injury was already beyond what could be addressed on board. The strike had torn through major vascular structures in the forearm. Crew applied pressure and used what first aid was available, but blood loss could not be controlled at that level. Emergency services were contacted and the vessel turned for shore. Danny Mercer died on board before reaching land. He was 45 years old. Post-incident review confirmed that Danny had manually intervened with the retrieval cable during active shark presence in direct deviation from the established protocol he had helped draft. Investigators noted that the tightening passes had been identified and communicated before the incident, and that his decision to remain in position reflected a pattern of risk normalization built up over years without consequence. The operating company revised its deck handling procedures and required a full pause in manual operations during any period of heightened shark activity near the hull, with a designated crew member assigned to enforce the boundary. No regulatory action was taken against the operator. It was July 29, 2017, and the murky waters off South Padre Island churned as thunderclouds gathered over the Texas Gulf Coast, creating conditions that brought one of the ocean's most dangerous species into the shallows. 19-year-old Micah Redden from Tulsa, Oklahoma, had never felt the ocean on his skin. Confined to a wheelchair by progressive muscular dystrophy, he retained sharp curiosity, and his parents, Darren and Lila, had planned this vacation to give him meaningful experiences while he still had sufficient strength. After 2 days building sandcastles and collecting shells, Micah begged to touch the water. It's hard not to picture how excited he must have been in that moment. Darren, an auto mechanic who had built custom modifications for Micah's wheelchair, carried him to a spot where other families played, reasoning the area would be safe, while Lila and their 11-year-old daughter Maya watched nervously. Bull sharks are a species frequently involved in near-shore attacks, with stocky builds reaching 8 to 11 feet, and capable of exerting powerful bite force sufficient to cause severe tissue and bone damage. They are adapted to hunt in shallow coastal waters and estuaries, and their territorial behavior makes them responsible for more near-shore attacks than most other shark species. Local fishing guides had reported increased baitfish activity near the shoreline all week, typically signaling larger predators moving in. Several surf fishermen observed schools of bait fish scattering in the water earlier that afternoon. The beach did not have a dedicated shark warning system, and lifeguards were primarily monitoring rip currents. Recent storms had stirred sediment, lowering visibility to less than 3 feet, which can make it more difficult to detect sharks moving through shallow water. As Darren carried Micah into the surf, the water reached roughly 4 feet deep. Micah's excitement was evident as small waves splashed against his legs and torso, sensations he had never experienced. Darren held him in a semi-floating position, supporting his arms and knees while letting the gentle surf wash over him. Unknown to the family, an approximately 8-foot bull shark had been moving through the shallows, following schools of small fish driven into the area by larger predators offshore. The shark's electroreceptors detected electrical signals and movement in the water, triggering its natural investigative behavior as it cruised through the murky surf. The attack occurred as Darren adjusted his grip. The bull shark struck from the side in the shallow water, its jaws closing on Micah's right leg. The impact knocked Darren off balance. Micah's compromised muscle control meant he could offer no resistance, as the shark's teeth caused severe tissue damage to the lower limb. The shark thrashed violently, pulling Micah partially beneath the surface before Darren regained his footing and hauled him upward. Darren desperately tried to maintain his footing and pull Micah away. I can't imagine the panic he must have felt trying to hold on to his son. The surrounding water darkened with blood as Darren struck the shark repeatedly with his fists. After several seconds, the shark released its grip and disappeared into the murky surf, leaving Micah's badly injured leg visible as Darren carried him toward shore. Darren carried his son toward shore while calling for help as blood flowed from severe wounds. Beachgoers, including a former military medic, attempted to apply pressure, but the injuries were extensive. Micah's breathing became shallow and irregular as blood loss accelerated. A lifeguard contacted emergency services. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but Micah had already gone into cardiac arrest from massive blood loss and trauma. Resuscitation continued before he was pronounced dead. The coroner's preliminary examination confirmed massive blood loss, severe vascular damage to the lower limb, and traumatic shock as the primary causes of death. The beach remained open, with temporary shark awareness signs and increased lifeguard patrols for the weekend. The Redden family returned home 3 days later, while local coverage focused on the rarity of shark attacks rather than the specific circumstances. 6 months later, disability advocates helped install a wheelchair-accessible beach ramp near the site, creating a small memorial honoring Micah's desire to experience the ocean despite his physical limitation. The incident highlighted the particular vulnerability of disabled individuals in marine environments, prompting updated safety protocols at several Texas beaches regarding assisted swimming and accessibility. From all accounts, Micah had done nothing to provoke the encounter, and the tragedy underscores how even careful planning cannot eliminate the inherent risks of engaging with nature. His brief experience in the surf remains a testament to his family's determination to create meaningful moments, blending joy with unavoidable danger. It was September 23rd, 2016. The Kedarnath Pilgrimage Trail in Uttarakhand passed through mountainous terrain at elevations approaching 12,000 feet. The narrow path, carved into cliffsides, was used regularly by pilgrims and visitors. Mae James, 38, arrived in the region 3 days earlier, carrying more camera equipment than survival gear. A freelance travel blogger from Portland, she had been struggling financially, and her online following had plateaued despite increasingly desperate attempts at viral content. She live-streamed sunrise yoga poses and pseudo-philosophical reflections, ignoring local customs and guidance. Villagers and fellow travelers grew weary of her condescending attitude and constant complaints about accommodations, insisting on special treatment as a content creator. Her presence during peak pilgrimage season marked her last attempt to salvage her failing blog. She clashed repeatedly with guides over safety protocols, dismissing warnings about weather and wildlife as superstition, while alienating other pilgrims with staged controversies and manufactured authenticity. The Kedarnath region harbors a significant population of Indian leopards, solitary predators capable of reaching 150 pounds and possessing bite forces exceeding 400 pounds per square inch. These cats are perfectly adapted mountain hunters, capable of dragging prey twice their weight up vertical cliff faces and remaining completely silent while stalking through dense rhododendron forests. Unlike their African cousins, Indian leopards have adapted to high-altitude hunting and show increased aggression during monsoon season when their natural prey becomes scarce. Village elder Ramesh had warned the evening group about a man-eating leopard that had killed a goat herder 3 weeks earlier near the trail's most dangerous section. The animal had shown unusual boldness, attacking during daylight and displaying no fear of human presence. Ramesh emphasized the critical importance of traveling in groups and avoiding the trail after sunset. Maya interrupted repeatedly, calling him a fear-mongering patriarch and accusing the village of perpetuating superstitious nonsense to maintain their patriarchal grip on spiritual tourism. When two young volunteers approached May at 7:15 p.m. to discourage her planned solo evening hike, she became increasingly hostile. She announced loudly to her live stream audience that she would not be mansplained or spiritually gatekeepered by backward locals who clearly did not understand her authentic journey. May declared her intention to hike alone at dusk for better lighting and genuine solitude, dismissing the volunteers' pleas as attempts to control her spiritual experience. She stormed away from the rest house at 7:30 p.m. with her phone camera rolling, determined to capture content that would finally make her travel blog profitable. May walked along the mountain path around 8:15 p.m., using her phone camera while adjusting settings for low-light conditions. Near a sharp switchback bordered by dense rhododendron bushes, a 150-pound male leopard was present in the vicinity. The leopard had been moving through the undergrowth and positioned itself on a rock outcropping approximately 8 feet above the trail. Leopards possess exceptional night vision, approximately 6 times better than humans, and their spotted coats provide perfect camouflage in dappled mountain shadows. May never stood a chance of seeing the predator watching her from above, its golden eyes tracking every movement as she fumbled with her phone's camera settings. The leopard descended from the rock and struck her from behind, knocking her forward onto the rocky trail. Its foreclaws secured her shoulders while its jaws closed at the base of her neck. Her phone fell from her hand, ending the live stream. The leopard adjusted its grip, maintaining pressure as she struggled beneath its weight. The leopard maintained its grip on her throat, applying sustained pressure consistent with large feline killing behavior. As trauma and airway compression progressed, her resistance weakened. After she became unresponsive, the animal secured her by the shoulder and dragged her off the trail into denser brush. May sustained extensive trauma to multiple areas during the attack, which contributed to significant blood loss and impaired mobility. Local searchers later located her backpack, scattered fragments of her phone, and other personal items along the path. Her body was subsequently recovered further down the ravine. The coroner's examination confirmed trauma to the neck, shoulders, and upper back consistent with predation by a large feline. Death resulted from blood loss, shock, and blunt force injuries. Local newspapers reported the incident briefly as a tourist fatality. Regional authorities increased patrols along the trail following the incident. It was September 22, 2017, in Kenya's Masai Mara National Reserve, where golden grass stretched across the plains under a crisp morning sky. A pride of lions lay scattered among termite mounds, nearly invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Jovel Tirado, 26, was a Filipina living in Dubai, working full-time as a dental hygienist while building her social media presence. She had just over 14,000 followers and was deeply invested in creating content that could grow her platform. She had no formal wildlife experience, no prior safari trip, and relied entirely on what she had seen online. It's surprising how fast curiosity and wanting something more can get someone into trouble in the wild. Even a careful person can be in serious danger from just one choice. The first 2 days passed without incident. Jovel filmed constant, narrating her experience with energy, but the footage lacked the dramatic edge she wanted. By the second evening, she expressed frustration to her friend Dina, seeking something more visually striking. On the morning of September 22nd, the group returned to a spot where a lion pride had been seen the day before, about 120 meters away and partly hidden. The guide, Elijah Koske, made it clear no one should leave the vehicle. Jovel asked to step out for a walking shot, ignoring repeated warnings and citing online videos. Even I also wanted to step out sometimes for a better angle, thinking I could handle it. And reading this really makes me realize how quickly that confidence can become deadly. While Elijah briefly stepped out to check a tire, she quietly opened her door, handed her phone to a friend, and walked several meters into the grass. A male lion, lying flat behind a termite mound 40 meters away, saw her isolated movement and instantly triggered its ambush instinct. Once the charge began, escape was nearly impossible. The lion struck from behind, knocking her to the ground with full force. The initial impact incapacitated her immediately. In the same sequence, the lion secured a bite at the back of her neck and upper spine. The motion was precise and controlled, causing instant collapse of motor function. Her body went still within seconds. Even imagining that moment makes my stomach drop. Just a few seconds, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The lion shifted slightly to maintain a throat hold, while pinning her to the ground. There was no prolonged struggle, no hesitation. The animal remained calm and deliberate. By the time Elijah reached her, the critical phase was complete. A warning shot caused the lion to release and retreat back to the pride. Jovel was unresponsive. Medical assessment later determined death occurred in less than a minute due to spinal trauma and suffocation. She had been outside the vehicle for under 90 seconds. This timeline highlights how fast irreversible outcomes can happen, faster than most people can process in real time. Emergency services followed protocol, but intervention was impossible once the attack began. The incident was classified as a wildlife fatality. Investigators confirmed the guide was not responsible. He had denied all requests to exit the vehicle. The lion was not destroyed, acting in line with natural predatory behavior. Even I sometimes feel tempted to step out for a better view or shot, but in predator areas I've learned that the vehicle isn't just a convenience, it's your lifeline. Once you leave it, you're instantly exposed, and no amount of warnings can physically stop a sudden move. Following the rules completely, every time, is the only way to stay safe. Jovel's body was returned to the Philippines, where her family held a private funeral. Her social media accounts remained unchanged, her final post still visible from the night before, captioned with anticipation for the next day. What remains is the quiet series of ordinary choices, moving outside the vehicle, seeking a better shot, that combine in seconds to create a fatal outcome. It was May 18th, 2018. Gansby, Western Cape, South Africa. A shark cage diving vessel operating roughly 2 miles off a coastline, known internationally for great white shark activity. The water was cold and visibility was moderate. The operation was commercial, licensed, and running a scheduled excursion with paying participants. Theo Mercer was 31. He worked as a furniture restorer out of a small workshop in his hometown. He was good with his hands and comfortable in physical environments. He had done some recreational diving before, mostly shallow reef dives, where the wildlife was manageable and the stakes were low. He had no experience with large predatory species. People who knew him described him as someone who trusted his own judgment, confident around animals, and comfortable enough in unfamiliar situations to push at the edges of them. He had planned the trip alone. He had told friends beforehand that he wanted something closer than watching from a boat. He described the dive as a chance to finally be face to face with something real. Before entry, the crew ran a full safety briefing. The rules were printed on a laminated board mounted at the entry point. They were read aloud before anyone entered the water. One rule was given more emphasis than the others. Keep all body parts inside the cage at all times. It was repeated again just before Theo entered. He acknowledged it. He went in. The cage was functioning as designed. The barrier between the participants and the actively baited water outside it was intact. Other marine life had already made several passes during the excursion. Approximately 20 minutes into the dive, a large great white approached on a slow lateral pass. It came close, within inches of the vertical bar spacing. Close enough to see clearly, close enough to fill the space in front of the cage completely. Theo released his grip on the inner bar with one hand. He moved toward the top opening of the cage and pushed his hand and forearm out through the gap above the frame into open water, reaching slightly toward the shark as it passed. He had been around smaller reef sharks before, and nothing had happened. He carried that experience into a situation where it did not apply. I just wonder what makes him think that the shark was his friend. The great white was not a reef shark. It was not indifferent to movement in its proximity. It was a large apex predator operating in actively baited water, conditioned to associate that environment with food, and responding to a new movement stimulus the way large apex predators do. The shark reacted the moment the arm entered its space. The bite was single, rapid, and severe. Its jaw closed at close to full arm extension, with a force that left no window for withdrawal. The strike caused immediate traumatic injury to the arm, severing major vessels and causing blood loss that began at a rate the crew had no means to control. Crew members at the surface moved immediately, pulling Theo back through the cage opening and onto the vessel. The extraction was complicated by the injury. He was out of the water within minutes, but the damage was already done. The wound was not survivable without immediate surgical intervention. The vessel was roughly 2 miles offshore. What was available on board was not sufficient for vascular trauma of that severity. Blood loss continued as the vessel made for shore. Emergency services had been contacted the moment he was back on deck. Theo Mercer died on board before the vessel reached the coast. He was 31 years old, post-incident review confirmed that the safety briefing had been conducted in full, that the cage was intact and had performed as intended, and that the injury occurred entirely as a result of the arm being extended through the top opening of the cage into actively baited water. The single rule that had been emphasized and repeated before entry had not been followed. The operating company reviewed its protocols and made adjustments to the physical cage design to reduce the gap available at the top opening. No regulatory action was taken against the operator. It was May 17, 2014, and the late autumn sun hung low over a private game reserve in South Africa's Limpopo province. The reserve allowed visitors to navigate dirt roads through Big Five territory in their own vehicles. Rules were posted at every gate, printed on maps, and repeated verbally by staff. Windows closed, doors locked. No visitor may exit their vehicle in predator zones. Margriet van Houten was a 45-year-old interior design blogger from Charleston, South Carolina, traveling with her husband, Peter, 48, a software consultant of South African descent who had grown up in the country but had not visited in over 15 years. The trip was Margriet's initiative, planned around content for her design and travel platforms. She had told friends she intended to capture photographs that would distinguish her feed from competing accounts. The couple entered the reserve at approximately 7 a.m. The gate ranger reviewed rules verbally and handed them a laminated safety card. He noted a pride of lions had been sighted near a waterhole along the eastern loop. After 90 minutes, they reached the waterhole area. Several vehicles had gathered, photographing through closed windows. The lions were visible, but distant, resting in tall, dry grass, roughly 100 yards from the road. Margriet was dissatisfied with the distance. She radioed the gate ranger, asking about closer access. He reminded her to remain in the vehicle. She insisted she had seen closer photographs from this reserve. The ranger repeated that no exceptions existed. Over the next 30 minutes, most vehicles moved on. One lioness had separated from the pride and settled into dry grass approximately 30 yards from the road, nearly invisible against the landscape. Margriet opened her door. Peter grabbed her arm and pointed at the safety card. She pulled free and told him she would only be a second. She exited, walking toward what she believed was an empty clearing. Two remaining vehicles began honking. A driver in a nearby SUV shouted for her to get back in. She waved them off and continued, camera raised toward the distant pride. African lions are among the continent's most formidable predators, with adult females weighing between 265 and 395 pounds and capable of explosive acceleration from rest. Lionesses are ambush specialists, whose tawny coloring renders them virtually invisible in dry grassland. They attack with speed and precision, closing short distances in seconds. Lions are responsible for a number of fatal attacks annually in some regions of Africa, with incidents concentrated where human proximity triggers reactive defensive behavior. The lioness had been resting less than 30 yards from where Margriet stood, aware of the vehicles for hours, but tolerating them as non-threatening. A human on foot was a different equation. According to the reserve's incident reconstruction, based on dashcam footage from a nearby vehicle, the lioness launched from the grass without any obvious warning that an untrained eye could have detected. No growl, no visible shift in posture. The attack covered the distance in just a few seconds. The impact struck Margriet from a direction she was not facing, targeting her upper body and neck. She was on the ground before the sound of her camera hitting the dirt reached the nearest vehicle. Peter started forward before stopping as others shouted at him to stay back. The honking intensified. The lioness hesitated, standing over Margriet for several seconds, before the sustained noise from multiple vehicles finally drove her back into the grass. The attack had lasted seconds. Reserve rangers reached the scene within several minutes. Margriet van Houten had suffered catastrophic injuries to her neck and upper body, leading to rapid death. She was pronounced dead before medical personnel arrived. Investigation confirmed she had exited in a marked predator zone against verbal, written, and posted warnings. The reserve was cleared of liability. The lioness was not destroyed, her behavior classified as a normal reactive response. The incident was logged with the Provincial Conservation Authority, and the area was temporarily closed for review. On May 21st, 2014, the clear tropical waters of Belize shimmered under the afternoon sun, concealing bull sharks resting in the sand channels and reef shadows of the shallow flats. The reef flats extended several hundred yards offshore, with water depths ranging from ankle deep to about 4 feet. Ideal conditions for sharks to move through largely unseen. Ronan Vale, 34, a highway construction foreman from Boise, Idaho, had never snorkeled before, arriving in Belize 5 days earlier, with co-workers Dale Hoffman and Cypher Alonso. After 8 months of grueling 12-hour shifts, supervising interstate construction, this vacation, funded by overtime, was his first extended break in over 2 years. Honestly, I feel for him. Anyone would be excited for a rare escape like this. With limited experience in water activities and only basic snorkeling instruction from the resort, he approached the ocean cautiously, while his companions were equally unaware of potential hazards. The resort provided basic snorkeling instruction focused on equipment use and water safety. No formal marine life briefings were given to independent snorkelers, and signage indicating shark activity was limited to guided tour groups. Bull sharks are active hunters, capable of operating in extremely shallow water. They do not rest motionless on the seabed the way some species do. They cruise slowly through channels and reef edges, responding quickly to nearby movement or disturbance. That morning, staff had observed unusually high shark activity due to seasonal feeding, but warnings were shared only with guided tour groups. Local fishing guides noted large sharks moving through sand channels, indicating active feeding conditions. Yet casual snorkelers remained unaware, assuming the placid waters were harmless. Ronan and his companions decided to explore a sandy channel roughly 300 yards from shore, where the receding tide had created water about 4 feet deep. The clear water revealed starfish and small rays on the white sand, but none of the men noticed a nearly 9-foot bull shark cruising slowly through the channel ahead of them. As Ronan stepped backward, joking with his friends about sunburns, he moved directly into the shark's path. The bull shark reacted instantly, clamping its jaws around his right calf. The teeth punctured skin and muscle, holding fast with the species' characteristic bite strength. Personally, this part gives me chills. Just a tiny misstep, triggering something catastrophic. Ronan screamed as Dale grabbed him under the arms, and Cypher tried to push the shark away with a fin, but the animal's jaw muscles resisted. The shark thrashed for several seconds before releasing and retreating into the channel. The water around them quickly clouded with blood, alerting nearby snorkelers and resort staff. After roughly 10 seconds, consistent with documented bull shark attack durations, the shark released Ronan and retreated. He collapsed into the shallow water, his leg badly injured and bleeding heavily from multiple puncture wounds. Dale and Cypher carried him towards shore, applying pressure to the most severe bleeding site, while a resort employee ran to contact emergency services. The nearest medical facility was on the mainland, requiring paramedics to traverse several miles of open water by boat. Despite immediate departure, the team did not arrive for roughly 30 minutes, by which point Ronan had lost consciousness from massive blood loss. Resuscitation efforts continued during transport and at the clinic, but multiple arterial punctures proved fatal. He was pronounced dead from exsanguination secondary to penetrating trauma, leaving friends and family stunned by the suddenness of the attack. In the aftermath, the resort implemented mandatory briefings for all guests engaging in water activities, including clear instructions about bull shark behavior and other marine hazards. Local tourism authorities quietly issued advisories to nearby resorts, highlighting the risks of unsupervised snorkeling in shallow reef areas, though distribution remained limited to avoid deterring diving tourism. Ronan's employer established a memorial fund for marine safety education, while Dale and Cypher required extensive counseling to cope with the trauma of witnessing the attack. It really hits me how one incident can ripple far beyond the victim, affecting everyone around them. The incident underscored the dangers of casual interaction with marine life in shallow reef environments, where predators can remain hidden despite seemingly calm conditions. It also highlighted the importance of clear, accessible safety communication for inexperienced tourists. It was August 9th, 2015. The Rufiji River Basin in Tanzania was deep into the dry season. The river had dropped significantly from its wet season levels, exposing wide stretches of soft, unstable bank. The mud along the waterline compressed underfoot in a way that made footing unreliable. Water itself was opaque with suspended silt, its surface a flat, featureless brown that gave no indication of depth, current, or what might be moving beneath it. The dry season on the Rufiji is when the river's crocodile population becomes most concentrated and most dangerous. As water levels drop, the areas where prey animals can drink become fewer and more predictable, and the crocodiles that patrol those areas know it. The silt makes it impossible to see into the water, which means a crocodile lying in 2 feet of water 3 feet from the bank is as invisible as one lying in the middle of the channel. The surface gives nothing away. I can't imagine being that close and thinking you can see all the danger. Daniel Kruger was 51 years old, a German hunter with considerable experience in African game, who had come to the Rufiji specifically for crocodile during the late dry season, when conditions were considered as favorable as they get, partnering up with Juma Salim, a 45-year-old who had spent his entire working life on the Rufiji. He knew that the waterline during the dry season was not a place to stand. It was a place to observe from a distance. The distinction was the difference between being a person watching a crocodile and being a person in a crocodile's environment. The Nile crocodile is one of the most effective ambush predators on the planet. An adult male can exceed 16 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds, capable of accelerating from complete stillness to full attack speed in a fraction of a second. It is an explosion from a stationary position, locating a target in completely opaque water with a precision that vision alone could not provide. The death roll uses the crocodile's body weight and the resistance of the water to tear rather than simply bite, and the instability of the target's footing to pull rather than simply hold. Daniel spotted a crocodile partially exposed near the bank. It was visible, positioned, and within range, but the angle was not ideal. To improve it, he stepped down onto the muddy slope and placed 1 foot at the waterline. The mud compressed and shifted under his weight. He lowered into a semi-kneeling position to stabilize himself. Juma warned him quietly to stay back. Daniel adjusted his footing again, shifting his weight slightly to find a more stable position. I can't see the reason here for stepping closer. The risk was already enormous. The adjustment sent a vibration through the waterlogged mud and into the water at the bank's edge. To a human being nearby, it would have been imperceptible. To a crocodile lying fully submerged within a few feet of the bank, it was precise and unambiguous information about the location and movement of something at the water's edge. The second crocodile had been there the entire time. It was lying fully submerged in the shallow water, invisible in the silted water, motionless in the way that crocodiles are motionless when waiting. Not the stillness of an animal at rest, but the stillness of an animal already committed to what it is about to do. Daniel had not seen it because it was not possible to see it. It was simply there, doing what Nile crocodiles do in the dry season along the Rufiji, and Daniel had placed himself within its range. It launched instantly. The crocodile clamped onto Daniel's leg and immediately initiated the death roll, using the torque of its body and the unstable footing of the muddy bank to pull him off balance. Daniel was on soft ground that could not support a braced resistance. The crocodile was in water that provided both leverage and mobility. Juma moved to intervene, but slipped on the same mud that had compromised Daniel's footing. Within seconds, Daniel was in the water. The transition from the bank to the deeper channel took very little time. The surface disturbance that marked the point of entry lasted only moments before going still. The Rufiji closed over the site of the attack and returned to its flat, featureless, opaque surface as if nothing had occurred. Partial remains were recovered downstream. The river had done what the river does. The crocodile Daniel had been watching from the bank was never the threat. It had drawn his attention and his decision to improve his angle. And while all of that was happening, the real threat had been lying in the water, 3 feet from where he placed his foot, waiting for the vibration that would tell it the time had come. It was October 12th, 2017. A private game reserve in South Africa's Lowveld operated routine afternoon safari drives under established wildlife safety protocols. Guests were required to remain seated inside open vehicles during predator sightings. Brielle Hutchins, 35, arrived 3 days earlier with the aggressive confidence of someone desperate to prove she belonged in luxury surroundings. A pharmaceutical sales representative from Atlanta, she had recently been promoted but felt her success hollow, projecting it through demanding behavior towards staff. Her colleagues knew her as a bully to subordinates and sycophant to superiors, a pattern she carried overseas, treating lodge staff with contempt, disguised as customer expectations. During her stay, staff documented repeated complaints regarding room assignments, meal quality, and wildlife viewing distances. Management discussed reassigning her to another guide after multiple disagreements over safety procedures. The afternoon game drive crossed the reserve's central plains, where scattered acacia trees offered minimal shade against the harsh October sun. Lions, apex predators built for short bursts of incredible speed, possess immense strength and bite force, evolved to take down large prey through coordinated pack hunting. Guide Thabo Mthembu spotted a pride of 8 lions resting beneath an acacia cluster just off the dirt track. He immediately stopped the open-sided vehicle and reminded guests to remain seated and quiet. Brielle repeatedly interrupted, complaining that the lions were boring and demanding the vehicle move closer for Instagram shots. When Thabo refused, citing safety and the lion's unpredictable behavior, Brielle grew increasingly belligerent, accusing him of laziness and unprofessionalism. The situation escalated when Brielle announced her intention to photograph the pride from outside the vehicle, dismissing Thabo's urgent warnings about lion behavior and territorial instincts. She had grown frustrated with what she perceived as overly cautious guides. Other guests urged her to remain seated, but she continued toward the pride despite repeated warnings. Against all safety protocols and Thabo's desperate commands, Brielle suddenly opened the vehicle door and stepped onto the ground, announcing she needed dramatic angles for her photographs. 2 lionesses lifted their heads and oriented toward her movement. The dominant male rose shortly afterward and began walking in her direction. Brielle waved dismissively at Thabo's frantic gestures, walking 10 meters toward the pride while holding her phone overhead. Lions can accelerate from 0 to 50 miles per hour in just a few seconds, and their paw swipes, delivered with 400 pounds of force, can break a human's spine instantly. The male watching Brielle calculated distance and opportunity with the precision of an apex predator that had killed hundreds of times before. The dominant male moved toward Brielle and initiated contact, causing her to fall to the ground. She sustained injuries to the chest, shoulders, and upper back, including puncture wounds and lacerations to soft tissue and muscle. The uneven terrain contributed to her loss of balance, and her movement outside the vehicle removed the physical barrier normally provided. The lion secured her by the neck and applied pressure to the throat region, consistent with predatory subdual behavior observed in large feline attacks. 2 lionesses approached shortly afterward. One made contact with the lower extremities, while the male maintained primary hold at the neck. Observable resistance decreased over the following 1 to 2 minutes. Movement gradually ceased, as trauma and blood loss resulted in loss of consciousness. She sustained catastrophic cervical trauma, consistent with tracheal compression and vascular injury. Once other guests were secured inside the vehicle, the guide initiated deterrent protocol using the engine and horn. A single warning shot was discharged into the ground at a safe angle. Following the noise and gunfire, the lions disengaged and moved several meters away. The surrounding terrain limited the guide's ability to approach safely. The coroner's examination confirmed extensive trauma consistent with large cat attacks, including puncture wounds, tearing of muscle and soft tissue, and crushing injuries to the neck, shoulders, and torso. Blood loss, shock, and blunt force trauma caused death. The lodge handled the incident with extreme discretion, cooperating with authorities while minimizing media coverage. Local newspapers mentioned only a brief tourist fatality, while Brielle's family received a substantial settlement, accompanied by a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Authorities classified the incident as a fatal wildlife encounter, resulting from violation of safari safety protocol. It was June 14th, 2017. Elphinstone Reef, Egyptian Red Sea. An open water shark dive operating at a remote offshore site known for reliable encounters with the oceanic white-tip shark. The dive was conducted under direct supervision, with guides in the water. Multiple sharks were present from the start of the session. One large oceanic white-tip, estimated at around 9 to 10 feet, had been circling at a distance since the group entered. The water. Blaine Carter was 28. He ran a social media page built around close wildlife footage and had around 6,000 followers. Every trip he took was content. Every dive was an opportunity to come back with something that would perform well and grow the page. He had paid approximately $4,000 for this dive and had told his followers before leaving that he would return with clear shark footage. The helmet-mounted GoPro he wore into the water was not just equipment, it was the whole point of being there. Before entry, the dive guides ran a full briefing. The rules were specific to the environment. Maintain a stable position. Do not reach toward sharks or any objects in the water. Do not pursue drifting equipment. Keep all movements controlled and deliberate. Oceanic whitetips were described during the briefing as slow-moving animals capable of sudden acceleration and highly responsive to erratic or uncontrolled movement in open water. Blaine heard the briefing and entered the water. The first portion of the dive went without incident. The sharks were present and moving at distance. Blaine was recording. The large white tip continued its wide circle around the group. Nothing happened that was outside the expected parameters of the dive. At some point during the session, the mount holding the GoPro to Blaine's helmet failed. The mount had not been secured with a secondary tether, and when the fitting gave way, the camera detached and drifted away from him in open water. He watched it move out of reach. Everything he had filmed was on that camera. He had paid $4,000 for the trip, told his audience he was coming back with footage, and the only record of the dive was now floating away from him. He moved toward the camera. He extended both arms out in front of him to reach it and grab it back. Sometimes I wonder why people think the rules exist. The briefing had said it directly. Do not pursue drifting equipment. He had heard it 40 minutes earlier. The camera drifted, and he went for it anyway. The movement was wide, sudden, and uncontrolled. Both arms extended away from his body in open water, with a species briefed specifically as reactive to exactly that kind of stimulus. The guides were positioned several meters away, managing the rest of the group, and could not reach him before the situation developed. He got his hands on the camera. As he pulled back, his posture was still off balance, both arms still extended and away from his body. His attention divided between the camera and reorienting himself. The white tip accelerated from its position and closed the distance. The bite landed on the exposed arm during the recovery phase, single and rapid. The animal disengaged immediately, consistent with investigative bite behavior in the species. The forearm sustained severe vascular damage. The brachial artery was compromised, and blood loss was significant from the first moment. The guides reached him and got him out of the water and onto the vessel as fast as they could manage. Survival depended on rapid surgical intervention that was not achievable in the time available. The vessel turned for shore, and emergency services were contacted. Blaine Carter died before reaching land. He was 28 years old. Post-incident review confirmed that Blaine had pursued drifting equipment in direct violation of the briefing, that both arms had been extended away from his body during the recovery attempt, and that his posture at the point of contact was unstable and uncontrolled. Shark behavior was assessed as a typical investigative response to erratic movement in open water. The GoPro was never recovered. No footage from the dive existed. The dive operation reviewed its equipment protocols and subsequently required all participant cameras to be secured with a secondary tether before entry. He went in for footage and came out with nothing. And the part I find tragic is that he paid with his life. It was April 8th, 2015. Along the banks of the Zambezi River in Lower Zambezi National Park, Zambia, where a wide sandy bank sloped quietly into slow-moving brown water. Just meters from shore, beneath a still inlet partially covered in reeds and algae, something large remained hidden. Hank Barsaga, 52, a semi-retired tobacco farmer from Chinhoyi, Zimbabwe, led a solitary, physically demanding life. Over 6 feet tall and heavily built, he spent most days repairing engines or tending a small garden. Twice divorced and rarely in contact with his adult children, he carried a quiet confidence from years of hands-on work. The canoe safari, arranged by his brother Fanis to reconnect, appealed to Hank, who felt at ease in the river and believed he understood its risks. The early part of the safari went by without incident. The group paddled downstream, camping on riverbanks and islands, observing wildlife from a distance. Their guide, Chisulobanda, 41, repeated the same rules each morning. Stay away from the water's edge, never crouch near the bank, and avoid direct contact with the river. I saw these weren't just casual suggestions. They came from years of fatal incidents, where one wrong step had cost someone their life. Hank acknowledged the instructions, but showed little concern, noting that crocodiles were slow and almost indifferent. The lunch stop appeared safe at first glance. The bank was open, slightly elevated, and offered clear visibility. No tracks or disturbances suggested recent animal activity, yet a narrow inlet branched inward, the water darker and still, partially obscured by reeds and algae. Field studies consistently identify these quiet inlets as high-risk zones. Still water allows crocodiles to remain hidden at extremely close range. After eating, Hank approached the water. His hands were greasy from handling fish, and he ignored the suggestion to use a bottle. He moved to the edge, lowered himself onto one knee, and leaned forward, placing both hands into the river just below the surface. The crocodile had already detected him. Hidden less than 5 meters away, it remained submerged, eyes and nostrils barely above water. The movement of Hank's hands was enough to trigger the predator. I've seen situations like this in my research, and it's striking how quickly a hidden threat can react to the smallest movement. The strike came instantly. The surface erupted. The crocodile lunged forward. Hank reacted too late. His right hand escaped, but his left arm was caught as the jaws closed. The force crushed bone instantly and pulled him forward. He screamed, struggling, fingers clawing into the wet sand, but the crocodile shifted its grip higher, securing him across the chest and abdomen. His leverage disappeared. Within moments, he was pulled fully into the river. The attack lasted only seconds. The water churned violently as the crocodile spun, maintaining its hold. A single glimpse of Hank's arm appeared above the surface before disappearing. Then, the river returned to calm. It's terrifying to realize how quickly a calm moment can turn deadly. There's almost no time to react once the predator strikes. Faunus reached the bank but was pulled back. The guides secured the group and called for emergency help, knowing that attempting to enter the water would only risk more lives. By the time a response team arrived over an hour later, the river yielded no sign of him. Hank's remains were recovered the next morning downstream, lodged beneath submerged roots, and confirmed through dental records and a tattoo. The incident was classified as a wildlife-related fatality. The crocodile was not pursued. The area was reassessed, and operators were instructed to avoid riverbanks near inlets or dense vegetation. This outcome highlights the razor-thin margin for safety in such environments. Even small actions, kneeling at the edge, placing hands in the water, ignoring a guide's instruction, can eliminate that margin entirely. From what I've seen, staying back from the water and following the guide's instructions is the only way to feel truly safe. Once a crocodile is underwater, there's almost no way to spot it before it strikes. Hank's body was returned to Zimbabwe. There was no widespread media coverage and no extended investigation beyond standard procedures. What remains is the stark reminder that ordinary, seemingly minor choices can align in seconds to create a fatal outcome, even for someone familiar with the environment. It was November 12th, 2013, and the afternoon sun filtered through the dense tropical canopy along a slow-moving river in the interior of Palawan, Philippines, where a small eco-lodge operated along a stretch of waterway known for its biodiversity and rich mangrove systems. The river's upper reaches were home to saltwater crocodiles that had rebounded following years of habitat protection, including a dominant male estimated at over 16 feet that local fishermen had tracked for years. The lodge had been built with full awareness of the crocodile population and maintained strict safety protocols accordingly. Catriona Delvaux was a 44-year-old Belgian freelance photographer based in Singapore, who had arrived 2 days earlier as part of a Southeast Asian travel circuit. Delvaux had built a modest portfolio of wildlife and landscape photography and had a reputation among travel industry contacts for being exceptionally difficult with service staff. She had already filed a complaint with the lodge manager on her first morning, accusing staff of failing to clean her cabin adequately and demanding a partial refund for the inconvenience. The lodge's riverside area was divided into zones. An upstream swimming area was enclosed by steel mesh barriers and monitored by staff. The downstream section, nearest the crocodile habitat, was marked by warning signs in English, Filipino, and Mandarin. A rope barrier with attached placards blocked access to stone steps leading to the water's edge. Beyond the rope, a locked steel gate separated the grounds from the restricted riverbank. Delvaux had expressed irritation about the swimming restrictions on her first day. On the afternoon of the incident, she demanded staff open the locked gate so she could photograph the river from the lower steps. The attendant explained the area was permanently restricted due to a confirmed large crocodile. Delvaux dismissed this, calling the signs a liability precaution. She told the attendant it would only take a few minutes. She asked to speak to the manager. The manager repeated the restriction, explaining the dominant male had been sighted within 48 hours. Delvaux told him she had traveled extensively through Southeast Asia, had never encountered a crocodile, and that his refusal would result in a detailed review campaign across every major platform, naming the lodge and individual staff. The manager did not relent. During the quiet mid-afternoon, when staff presence along the Riverside was minimal. Delvaux left her cabin with her camera. She stepped over the rope barrier, climbed around the locked gate using the adjacent fence railing, and descended the stone steps to the restricted riverbank. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with dominant males regularly exceeding 16 feet and weighing over 1,500 pounds. They possess the most powerful bite of any living animal, generating pressures exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch, among the strongest bites ever recorded. Their ambush strategy relies on remaining motionless and invisible in murky water before striking with explosive speed. The attack involves clamping onto a victim and immediately dragging toward deeper water. Saltwater crocodiles are responsible for documented fatal attacks annually across their range in Southeast Asia and northern Australia. Delvaux crouched on the lowest step to photograph the river surface, her lower legs close to the waterline. The crocodile had been resting in the murky shallows within roughly 10 to 15 feet of the steps, completely concealed beneath the opaque surface. There was little visible disturbance beyond a sudden surge at the waterline. The crocodile lunged explosively from the water's edge, massive jaws clamping around Delvaux's lower body. The strike was instantaneous, the animal's momentum pulling her from the steps and into the river. A brief splash and a cut-short sound were the only indication anything had occurred before the crocodile dragged her beneath the surface and away from the bank. The murky water settled back to stillness within seconds. Staff discovered the breached barriers approximately 45 minutes later. Emergency services and wildlife rangers were contacted. Partial remains were recovered downstream over the following days, consistent with crocodile feeding behavior. The dominant male was later captured and removed by wildlife authorities. The investigation confirmed Delvaux had bypassed 3 layers of barriers, signage, rope, and locked gate against explicit staff refusal. The lodge was cleared of all liability. The incident was reported to the Regional Environmental Authority. It was September 4th, 2015, and the calm coastal waters concealed one of the world's densest great white shark population, drawn by nearby seal colonies just beyond the swimming area. Galen Varga, 78, a retired South African railways worker, swam daily along Fish Hoek Beach in slow, careful breaststroke, never venturing beyond waist-deep water. If I were in his position, that depth would probably feel safe enough too. A childhood near the Danube had instilled a lifelong belief that swimming prevented arthritis, and he limited his swims to roughly 200 yards along the same stretch. Though he'd seen sharks over the years, he dismissed them as distant, isolated sightings, while his wife watched from their balcony each morning, reassured by his methodical routine. The morning conditions at Fish Hoek Beach appeared ideal, with minimal wave action and excellent visibility extending well beyond the swimming area. Great white shark are apex predators that can reach lengths of 20 feet and weights exceeding 5,000 pounds. The local shark spotter program had issued no warnings that morning, and the observation posts stationed on the surrounding hills reported no unusual activity in the bay. However, several dog walkers later mentioned seeing unusual splashing activity near Seal Island approximately 30 minutes before Galen entered the water, suggesting that hunting activity had been occurring in the area. Galen followed his established routine, despite noticing that fewer people than usual were swimming that morning, a detail that should have indicated heightened caution among locals familiar with shark behavior patterns. Personally, that's the kind of small detail I would probably overlook too. As Galen waded into the water at his customary spot, the calm surface conditions provided perfect visibility for both swimmer and predator. He moved methodically to his preferred depth of approximately 4 feet, where the water reached his lower chest, and began his usual slow progression parallel to the beach. Unknown to Galen, a subadult great white, measuring an estimated 10 to 12 feet, had been patrolling the deeper waters beyond the swimming area since dawn, likely attracted by the scent trails from recent seal activity. The shark's enhanced sensory system had detected Galen's electrical signature and irregular movement pattern from significant distance, triggering the investigative behavior that characterizes great white encounter with unfamiliar unfamiliar prey. The attack began without warning, as Galen paused to rest approximately 80 feet from shore, treading water in the chest-deep zone he considered safe, though the nearby drop-off and seal activity meant larger predators could occasionally pass closer to shore than expected. The great white approached from behind and below, its massive form invisible against the darker water until the moment of impact. The force of the strike briefly lifted Galen partially above the surface before the shark's jaws closed around his torso, its upper teeth penetrating his back while the lower jaw gripped his chest and abdomen. The impact drove both predator and victim through the water as the shark's powerful body weight compressed Galen's ribcage and spine. The crushing force of the bite fractured multiple ribs and caused immediate internal hemorrhaging, while the shark's instinctive thrashing motion created additional trauma to his internal organs. Galen's body went limp almost immediately as the shark's teeth penetrated his back and likely damaged his spine, eliminating any possibility of struggle or escape. The shark's grip lasted only a few seconds before it released, a typical response during an initial strike. Blood spread rapidly through the surrounding water in expanding dark cloud as the predator circled back briefly before departing into deeper water. From a nearby balcony with a view of the shoreline, Lenka witnessed the water around her husband suddenly erupt in violent splashing, accompanied by an unmistakable dark discoloration, spreading rapidly through the previously clear water. Her immediate screaming alerted other beachgoers, several of whom began running toward the water's edge, while simultaneously reaching for mobile phone. I can't imagine what it would feel like to realize what you're seeing from that distance. When the shark finally departed, Galen's lifeless body surfaced face down in the bloodied surf approximately 60 feet from shore. The attack lasted less than 2 minutes from initial strike to the shark's departure, but the damage was catastrophic and immediately fatal. A nearby fisherman contacted emergency services, while local shark spotter volunteers arrived at the scene within minutes. Paramedics reached the beach shortly afterward, but Galen had suffered massive trauma incompatible with life and was pronounced dead upon examination. Sadly, by then, the situation was already beyond help. The coroner's preliminary assessment indicated death resulted from massive internal trauma, severe spinal trauma, and exsanguination caused by multiple penetrating wounds to the torso. The incident prompted a brief beach closure while authorities reviewed safety protocols, added shark warning signs, and increased early morning patrols. The precautions were necessary, but I can't help wondering if stronger warnings or restricted access could have prevented this. From all accounts, her husband was careful. This was a tragedy no one could truly foresee. It was January 22nd, 2019. Matabeleland North in Zimbabwe sits under the full weight of a Southern African summer in January. The heat builds from early morning and distorts the air above open ground. The vegetation in January is at its densest. The rains have been running since November, and the bush has responded with growth that fills every gap between trees and reduces visibility to a fraction of what it is in the dry season. The ground is uneven, cut through with drainage lines, and scattered with roots and rocks that make fast movement dangerous. Richard Hale was 58 years old, a British hunter with decades of experience pursuing dangerous game. He had hunted elephant before, understood the demands of the frontal brain shot, placed with precision into a moving target under significant psychological pressure, and had done everything correctly up to the moment the elephant committed to its charge. Even in that moment, he had done almost everything correctly. Almost was not enough. By his side was Tendai Moyo was 50 years old, a Zimbabwean professional hunter who had spent his career in the mixed woodland of Matabeleland, guiding hunters after elephant and buffalo in terrain. He knew with the intimacy of someone who had walked it for 30 years. He knew the signs of escalating agitation, knew the difference between a mock charge and a committed one, and knew that the window between a committed charge and contact is measured in seconds that feel much shorter than they are. The African elephant is the largest land animal on Earth, and an adult bull can weigh over 6 tons and accelerate from a standing start to a full charge in a distance and time that consistently surprises people who have not seen it happen. The frontal brain shot must be placed into a target roughly the size of a large grapefruit, located deep within a skull that has evolved specifically to absorb and deflect impact. The skull of an adult bull elephant is a complex structure of bone and air cavities that distributes force in ways that make a slightly off-center shot deflect rather than penetrate. At 25 meters, with the animal already moving, the difference between a stopping shot and a deflection is a matter of centimeters. It's almost impossible for me to imagine hitting that target perfectly under such pressure. They had been tracking the bull since early morning. When they found it, it was already showing signs of agitation. Head elevated, ears spread wide, trunk curling inward. Tendai advised repositioning for a better angle. Richard held his position at approximately 25 meters, waiting for the animal to settle. The elephant did not settle. It initiated what appeared, in the first fraction of a second, to be a mock charge. Then it committed. The transition from mock charge to committed charge is not always clearly telegraphed. The indicators are subtle and occur in the same fraction of a second that the charge begins. At 25 meters, the time between commitment and contact is approximately 2 to 3 seconds. As the elephant closed the distance, dust erupted around its feet and partially obscured the anatomical landmarks the frontal brain shot requires. Richard fired as the reference shifted. The shot landed slightly off the brain, not by much, not by a distance visible to an observer, but by enough. The bullet deflected on the heavy skull structure. Rather than penetrating to the brain, the elephant did not slow. I can hardly wrap my head around how precise and unforgiving that anatomy is. Tendai fired immediately, stepping laterally to change his angle. But the mixed woodland disrupted the clean shooting lane that movement required, and the angle he was forced to take was not the angle he needed. Richard attempted to cycle another round, but the ground beneath him was uneven, and he lost his footing. The elephant reached him. Richard Hale was trampled. Tendai continued firing at close range until a final shot found the angle it needed, and the animal collapsed. Richard Hale died at the scene. The shot had been close. In almost any other context, a shot landing within centimeters of its intended target achieves its purpose. But the frontal brain shot on a charging elephant at 25 meters with dust in the air and the visual reference moving is not a situation in which almost is sufficient. The deflection was not bad luck, it was physics. And the 2 to 3 seconds between the committed charge and contact were not enough time to recover, cycle a second round, and place a second shot before the distance closed to 0. Tendai had done everything a professional hunter could do. He had read the animal's agitation correctly. He had advised repositioning. He had fired immediately when the first shot failed. He had continued firing until the animal was down. None of it changed the outcome for Richard Hale, because the outcome had been determined in the fraction of a second when the shot landed centimeters from where it needed to land, and the elephant, which had been given every reason to stop, did not stop. The mixed woodland of Matabeleland North was quiet again by the time the situation was fully resolved. The heat continued to build. The dust settled back onto the ground. The bush returned to the particular stillness of a January afternoon, indifferent to what it had witnessed and unchanged by it. It was September 3rd, 2015. Neptune Islands, South Australia. A shark cage diving vessel running a scheduled excursion at one of the most established great white shark dive sites in the world. A research team was on board that day, observing and documenting the behavior of a large female great white estimated at approximately 17 feet. The animal had been present since the session began. Vincent Cole was 39. He ran an adventure travel blog and had built a following around experiences that most people would not attempt. Shark cage diving was not new to him. He had completed 47 prior cage dives across multiple locations and considered himself well beyond the level of a standard participant. He was familiar with procedures, familiar with how sharks moved around cages, and had developed what he believed was a reliable ability to read their behavior from inside. That confidence was not unfounded in a general sense. It was misapplied on September 3rd. Before entry, the crew ran the standard safety briefing. The rules were clear. Stay inside the cage. Follow crew instructions immediately and without question. If a recall is issued, exit without delay. Vincent had heard versions of this briefing 47 times before he entered the cage. The female great white had been circling the cage since early in the session. The research team on board was documenting her behavior, and what they observed was not typical. Her circling pattern was tighter than normal. She was making repeated close passes with a consistency that suggested heightened interest rather than routine investigation. Visible jaw movement was noted during several of the passes. The researchers flagged the behavior to the crew. The crew issued a recall. All divers were instructed to exit the cage immediately. The other participants began moving toward the exit. Vincent stayed where he was. The crew repeated the instruction. He told them they were overreacting. He said he had more experience than anyone else in the water and that he could read the shark. He said the animal was not a threat. While the other divers cleared the cage, he remained at his position and leaned forward toward the bars rather than moving back toward the exit. He removed one hand from the internal grip bar. His body shifted toward the door seam where the cage opening was widest. This part still bothers me. The crew said it twice. Vincent Cole, 47 dives deep, told all of them to relax. The female great white came through on another close pass while he was in that position. Vincent lost his footing on the cage floor. As he stumbled forward, his arm slipped through the gap at the door seam, crossing the cage boundary into open water at the moment the shark completed her pass at close range. The animal reacted without hesitation. The bite closed on the exposed forearm. She followed it immediately with a forceful lateral shake. The motion wrenched the arm hard against the doorframe before the crew could reach him. The radial and ulnar arteries were torn. The injury was catastrophic from the first moment of contact. Blood loss was immediate and severe. Crew members on the vessel pulled him from above the waterline, hauling the cage line and reaching down from the deck. Vincent was on the deck within minutes, but the damage could not be reversed with what was available on board. Emergency response was initiated, and the vessel turned for shore. Vincent Cole died on board before reaching land. He was 39 years old. Post-incident review confirmed that he had refused a direct recall instruction, repeated across approximately 90 seconds, that his positioning at the cage door seam was inconsistent with proper protocol, and that the other participants had exited without incident. The operating company introduced physical confirmation steps requiring crew sign-off before any participant could remain in the cage during a recall. 47 dives. A recall he ignored twice. Every other participant was already clear. He was the only one still in the water. It was October 28, 2018. And the subarctic tundra near Churchill stretched toward ice-free waters. During the pre-ice season, nutritionally stressed polar bears gathered in the area, increasing the risk of human encounters. Strict safety protocols were in place, but their effectiveness depended on visitor compliance. Natalia Cooper, 39, arrived days earlier, carrying the bitterness of a life recently upended. A former office manager, she had lost her job due to absenteeism and confrontational behavior, leading to eviction and the humiliating need to move back in with her mother. The Budget Polar Bear Adventure Tour represented her attempt to prove she could still manage independence, though fellow travelers quickly grew weary of her constant complaints about tour rules. Her presence had already created conflicts with the lead guide Tommy, whose family had lived in the area for generations. Natalia dismissed safety briefings as unnecessary theatrics, interpreting genuine warnings about bear behavior as personal slights. Her confrontational attitude alienated other tourists. Churchill's location on the western shore of Hudson Bay creates a unique situation where polar bears concentrate in unprecedented numbers during the pre-ice season from October through November. Adult male polar bears can exceed 1,500 pounds and possess bite forces of 1,200 pounds per square inch. But their primary danger during the pre-ice period stems from nutritional stress that drives increasingly desperate predatory behavior. Tommy had emphasized repeatedly that late October represented the most dangerous period for human-bear encounters, when nutritionally stressed bears lose their natural wariness of humans and begin exhibiting predatory hunting behaviors. The town had implemented strict protocols requiring tourists to travel in groups and avoid dawn or dusk activities when bear movement peaked. The evening before her death, Natalia had announced her intention to take an early morning solo walk to photograph the aurora borealis, dismissing Tommy's urgent warnings about bear activity during pre-dawn hours. When Tommy and other tour members strongly discouraged this plan, Natalia exploded in fury, accusing everyone of controlling her and treating her like a stupid American who couldn't handle basic outdoor activities. Despite explicit instructions prohibiting solo travel outside the lodge, Natalia left through a rear exit without notifying the guides. She walked along the perimeter road to photograph the aurora borealis. During this time, a male polar bear in the area, experiencing nutritional stress during the pre-ice season, was moving systematically through the outskirts and detected her presence. A nutritionally stressed male polar bear had been moving systematically through the outskirts, following scents that drew him toward areas with human activity. Unlike the defensive attacks typical of brown bears, polar bear predation during this pre-ice season represents calculated hunting behavior. Unlike other bears, polar bears are true carnivores with no fear of humans. They actively hunt people as prey when hungry. During the pre-ice season, after months without food, a starving polar bear views a lone human not as a threat to avoid, but as a meal to pursue. The bear detected Natalia's movement behind a storage shed and approached with the silent precision of an Arctic apex predator. The bear made contact from behind, and Natalia lost her balance, tumbling onto the snow-covered ground. The predator's massive jaws and weight caused immediate and severe injuries to her neck, shoulders, and upper torso, including deep puncture wounds, lacerations, and extensive soft tissue trauma. The force of the attack also inflicted blunt force trauma to her ribs and internal organs, while major blood vessels were severed, leading to rapid blood loss. As she struggled to regain her footing, the bear's grip prevented movement. The combination of crushing force, sharp bites, and sustained pressure overwhelmed her body's ability to respond. Despite attempts to move or cry out, Natalia became immobilized by the combination of trauma, shock, and hemorrhage. The polar bear did not disengage. It maintained control of her body, repositioning and dragging her several feet across the snow toward partial cover near the shed. Feeding behavior began shortly after she ceased resisting. The attack was sustained and methodical, consistent with predatory intent. A local worker observed the bear and notified regional wildlife authorities. The authorities arrived with deterrent equipment and were able to drive the bear away from the area. The post-mortem revealed massive trauma to the spine and skull consistent with a large predator attack, including crushing injuries and extensive tissue damage. Death resulted from catastrophic cervical spine trauma and neurogenic shock, compounded by severe blood loss. Wildlife authorities classified Natalia's death as a predatory attack during the pre-ice season. Her mother managed arrangements privately. The bear was tracked and euthanized shortly after in accordance with regional wildlife management protocols, as polar bears that carry out confirmed predatory attacks are not considered safe candidates for relocation. It was August 9th, 2017, and the late summer sun hung low over the coastal mountains of southeastern Alaska, where a remote fly-in fishing lodge operated along a salmon river accessible only by float plane. The surrounding wilderness stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction, with the nearest road over 50 miles away. The Sockeye Run was nearing its peak, drawing both sport fishermen and the grizzly bears that depended on the migration to build fat reserves before winter. The river was low enough in places to expose gravel islands where bear tracks were visible. Darlene Kossuth was a 47-year-old orthodontist from Boca Raton, Florida, with no prior bear country experience, though she had informed the lodge she was an avid hiker and considered herself comfortable around wildlife. She had booked the 5-day fishing package as a birthday trip for herself, telling friends beforehand that she planned to get close enough to photograph grizzlies feeding on salmon. Her first 2 days had been marked by repeated clashes with staff, complaints about accommodations, demands for a private guide rather than sharing with other guests, and loud criticism of meals in front of other visitors. The morning fishing session was led by a 31-year-old guide named Callum Renwick, a wildlife biology graduate who had worked Alaskan salmon rivers for 6 seasons. Renwick carried bear spray on his chest harness and, in some operations, a firearm as a last resort. He briefed the group of 4, covering mandatory protocols. Maintain tight formation. Never approach bears within 100 yards. Stay calm. Speak softly, and back away slowly during encounters, and follow his instructions without hesitation. Kossuth interrupted the briefing twice. First to ask if the rules were necessary, given that she had hiked in Yellowstone, and again to suggest Renwick was being dramatic for less experienced guests. The group reached a wide gravel bar, where the river narrowed through a shallow riffle. Approximately 200 yards upstream, a grizzly sow and 2 young cubs were fishing in the shallows. Kossuth fished for 20 minutes before losing interest. She set her rod down and walked upstream along the gravel bar, camera in hand, toward the sow. Renwick called out immediately. She waved him off without turning, saying she just wanted a couple of shots. He moved to intercept, positioning himself directly in her path and commanding her to stop. Kossuth told him to move. She insisted she had been around wildlife her entire life and did not need a babysitter. She warned that every fishing forum and travel site would hear about the lodge's service. When Renwick held his position and repeated his command, she sidestepped around him and continued walking. Grizzly bears are the most powerful terrestrial predators in North America, with adult females weighing between 300 and 450 pounds. Their claws extend up to 4 inches and can cause devastating wounds with a single swipe. Grizzly sows with cubs are responsible for the majority of fatal bear attacks, their defensive instincts overriding any tolerance of humans. A grizzly can sprint at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour. Grizzly bears have been responsible for rare but well-documented fatal attacks across North America. Kossuth had closed to roughly 40 to 50 yards from the sow when the bear stood upright, scanning the riverbank. The sow had already begun tracking Kossuth's approach. She lowered her head and surged forward in a bluff charge, 20 yards in an explosive burst, gravel spraying, before stopping abruptly, huffing and stamping. Kossuth froze. Renwick, roughly 10 yards behind her, had his bear spray drawn and called to her to back toward him slowly, without turning. She remained frozen for several seconds, then turned sharply and began walking quickly back. The combination of close distance and sudden movement triggered the defensive charge. The sow closed the remaining distance with terrifying speed, reaching Kossuth before Renwick could close the gap. According to the incident report filed by the State Wildlife Agency, the sow knocked Kossuth to the ground and delivered multiple rapid bites and swipes, many impacting the head and neck. Renwick deployed multiple bursts of bear spray toward the bear's face. The damage had already been done by the time the spray took effect, but the sow recoiled and retreated toward her cubs, disengaging once the perceived threat stopped moving. The entire attack lasted less than 10 seconds. The injuries to Kossuth's head and neck resulted in catastrophic trauma, leading to rapid death. Renwick radioed for emergency evacuation. Due to the remote location, evacuation took over 2 hours. The investigation determined Kossuth had deliberately bypassed her guide's verbal commands and approached a grizzly sow with cubs well inside safe distance. Renwick was cleared of all responsibility. The incident was logged with the State Wildlife Agency. It was July 22nd, 2017, Gansbaai, Western Cape, South Africa. A shark cage diving vessel operating off one of the most well-known, great white shark locations in the world. The water was cold, fed by the Benguela Current running up the Atlantic side of the Cape. Baiting had been used to draw sharks to the area, and great whites had been making repeated close passes along the cage since the session began. Curtis Hale was 33. He worked as a sales representative and had been planning this trip for several years. It was his honeymoon. He and his wife had saved for it deliberately, and the shark dive had been one of the experiences they had looked forward to the most. His wife stayed on the vessel and watched from the deck above, while Curtis entered the water with the other participants. Before anyone entered the water, the crew ran a full safety briefing. The no alcohol policy was written into the waiver every participant signed before boarding and was stated again out loud before the dive. The reasoning was straightforward. The environment required complete physical awareness. A submerged cage surrounded by large predatory animals responding to bait left no room for any reduction in coordination or spatial judgment. Curtis had brought a flask on board. He consumed alcohol before entering the water. The level of impairment was mild and was not visible to the crew or to anyone else around him. He entered the cage. Let me be fair here. Sometimes alcohol gives you that boost you need, but the truth is that it was not needed in this situation. The session ran without incident through the first portion of the dive. Great whites were moving close to the cage on repeated passes, coming within inches of the vertical bars. The animals were behaving exactly as expected in actively baited water. Curtis was watching them from inside the barrier along with the other participants. At some point during the dive, a great white, estimated at approximately 3.5 meters, made a sudden close pass along the side of the cage. A shark that size moving at speed through enclosed water creates a pressure surge around the cage that participants inside can feel physically. Curtis lost his footing during the pass. He reached upward instinctively to steady himself, and his hand went through the top opening of the cage, past the frame, and into open water above the barrier at the moment the shark was completing its pass at close range. The animal reacted instantly. The bite closed on his hand and forearm at the top of the cage. The shark followed immediately with a brief lateral shake, a natural mechanical response, and the motion wrenched the arm hard against the top frame before anyone above could intervene. The forearm contains the radial and ulnar arteries. Both were torn. Blood loss began immediately, and at a rate the crew had no means to control on the water. Crew responded the moment the incident occurred and pulled Curtis back inside the cage and up to the deck as quickly as possible. His wife was on deck when he came up. Emergency response was initiated immediately, and the vessel turned for shore. The trauma was beyond what could be managed on board. Curtis Hale died before the vessel reached land. He was 33 years old. His wife took his remains home. Post-incident review confirmed that Curtis had consumed alcohol before the dive in direct violation of the policy stated in the waiver and repeated during the briefing. Investigators determined that the impairment was a contributing factor, but identified the primary trigger as the loss of footing during the close pass. The hand placement that followed was instinctive rather than deliberate. No regulatory action was taken against the operator. The company reviewed its boarding and pre-entry checks following the incident. It was their honeymoon. His wife was on the deck. He signed the waiver. He brought the flask. One stumble, one bad grip. She took him home. It was November 3rd, 2014, off the coast of Aliwal Shoal in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, where green-tinted water rolled over a reef known for its dense shark population. Beneath the surface, visibility was limited, and movement carried farther than sight. Brennan Calloway, 29, was an American expat living in Durban, working as a paid dive instructor. Relaxed, confident, and deeply comfortable in the water, he had been spearfishing for about a year and a half. He knew the ocean well enough to feel capable, but not enough to recognize every hidden risk. From diving incident reports, I've found that this stage, confidence outpacing, experience, is often where preventable mistakes happen. The morning dive started routinely. The group explored reef caves, encountering ragged-toothed sharks and large reef fish without issue. Conditions were decent, but visibility was limited to about 10 meters due to plankton. Not dangerous in itself, but anything approaching would appear late. The plan was to spearfish later in the afternoon, and the group prepared for it with clear briefings. Guidelines were simple. Stay in pairs. Do not struggle with fish at depth. Secure any catch immediately to a float line, and never swim with a bleeding fish. Blood and vibration attract predators, especially bull sharks, which react to chemical and mechanical cues more than visual ones. Brennan listened and nodded, entering the water with his partner, Jacko. Mid-session, he descended to roughly 12 meters and fired at a yellowfin tuna. The shot hit, but not cleanly. The fish thrashed violently, releasing blood. Instead of ascending immediately, Brennan stayed down, trying to control it, holding the spear with one hand and the fish with the other. The water began to change around him. From marine studies, I know that struggling prey and blood in the water can draw bull sharks in seconds. Somewhere beyond visibility, a bull shark detected him. Brennan ascended, still managing the fish, vertical in the water, unaware of the predator below. The shark approached directly, without hesitation. The strike came fast and hard, clamping onto his right side between hip and ribs. The force threw him off balance immediately. The shark moved methodically, then released. Brennan surfaced seconds later, separated from the fish and spear. He was conscious, but badly injured, holding his side as blood spread across the water. Jacko reached him quickly, assessing the wound. The damage was severe. A large section of tissue along his right flank was removed, exposing deeper structures. Being in the water like that, I can really understand how impossible it would be to stop the bleeding. Once it started, there was almost nothing you could do to survive. Jacko pulled him toward the boat while calling for help. The crew applied pressure using towels, clothing, anything available, but the wound was too large. Blood continued to flow. Brennan spoke briefly, then went quiet. His breathing slowed and stopped. Attempts to revive him during the return to shore failed. Emergency services met the boat, confirming his death. Cause: rapid blood loss from severe trauma to the abdominal area. He had been in the water less than an hour. The incident was classified as a fatal shark attack. The shark was not pursued, and dive operations continued, though advisories were reinforced regarding spearfishing in low visibility conditions. From my own experience in the water, I can see how easy it is to make small choices that that feel fine in the moment, like staying down a bit longer or holding on to a struggling fish. This really hits. Me, that's sticking to the safety rules, like securing the catch quickly and avoiding bleeding fish in the water, is the only way to prevent something going horribly wrong. His body was returned to the United States. His father traveled to South Africa to collect belongings, spending time alone in his son's apartment before returning home. The dive community noted the loss, but it received little attention beyond local reporting. What stands out is how quickly a small decision, holding the fish a little longer, trusting experience, trying to control it, can cascade into a fatal outcome. In open water, the environment reacts instantly, leaving almost no margin for error. Even confident, experienced individuals can face danger in a moment. A reminder that the ocean demands respect beyond skill alone. On October 8, 2013, the calm pre-dawn waters off Mossel Bay concealed great white sharks patrolling near a sandbar that extended 150 yards from shore, where converging currents attracted seals and other prey. Calder Nix, 42, had begun kayak fishing 2 years earlier during a difficult divorce, using it to find solitude before his warehouse shifts. A Mossel Bay native, he purchased a basic sight-on-top kayak after his ex-wife retained their powerboat. His simple tackle setup suited his methodical approach and provided routine and independence during otherwise isolating circumstances. I get the feeling he treasured these quiet mornings alone more than anyone could know. Calder's approach to fishing was conservative. He typically stayed within 100 yards of shore, targeting smaller species such as yellowtail and bonito, avoiding excursions into deeper water that posed greater risk. His co-workers at the warehouse considered him reliable, but increasingly solitary, someone who preferred sharing observations from his weekend fishing outings rather than participating in broader social activities. The waters around Mossel Bay are a known hunting ground for great white sharks, with adults reaching 15 to 20 feet in length. These sharks are capable of breaching the surface with significant vertical speed, delivering impact forces sufficient to incapacitate seals and other large prey. Local shark monitoring groups issued informal alerts to anglers via word of mouth and online fishing forums, though official warnings were limited. Calder noticed higher than usual numbers of seabirds diving in deeper water that morning, usually indicating baitfish activity driven by predators, but he interpreted it as normal feeding behavior. Calder paddled his yellow kayak toward a preferred fishing spot over the sandbar, where the water measured roughly 4 feet deep. He positioned himself approximately 40 yards from shore and prepared his tackle, using fresh sardines and pilchards purchased the previous evening. Unbeknownst to him, a great white shark of roughly 14 feet had been patrolling the deeper channel adjacent to the sandbar since before dawn. The shark's electroreceptors detected the unusual electrical signals from the kayak and occupant, while its acute sense of smell registered the bait's scent dispersing in the water. The silhouette of the kayak and Calder's movements created visual cues similar to injured seals, the shark's typical prey in these waters. While concentrating on reeling in a hooked bonito near the edge of the sandbar, Calder remained unaware of the predator approaching from the deeper channel. The shark accelerated, using the cover of the deeper water to close the distance before breaching the surface. Its strike came directly from below, delivering a sudden impact that severely dented the kayak and knocked Calder into the water. His fishing gear, including tackle boxes, rods, and bait, was scattered across the surface, further complicating his ability to stabilize himself or respond. Before he could regain orientation or attempt to swim toward the partially submerged kayak, the shark's jaws closed on his upper torso. The upper teeth penetrated the area between his shoulder blades, while the lower teeth gripped his chest and abdomen, creating puncture wounds that immediately compromised both lung function and circulation. The force of the bite fractured multiple ribs and compressed internal organs, including the heart and lungs, while severing major blood vessels. The shark engaged in brief head-shaking behavior before releasing, a predatory response consistent with great white attacks on large prey. These movements worsened the trauma to Calder's already damaged internal organs and skeletal structure, accelerating blood loss. Calder's body went limp almost immediately as spinal injury, severe internal trauma, and hemorrhaging made voluntary movement impossible, leaving him incapacitated in the water. The water around the site quickly discolored as the shark retreated into deeper water, leaving the damaged kayak and scattered tackle behind. You can almost hear the silence that follows, a stark contrast to the chaos just moments before. Rescue boats from local marine emergency services arrived within 14 minutes of the call. Surface searches recovered only broken kayak pieces and scattered tackle. Underwater searches later found Calder's body, with injuries consistent with predatory shark attacks. The coroner classified the death as a predatory shark attack, noting that the injuries, including multiple punctures to the torso, fractured ribs, and massive internal trauma, were instantly fatal. Authorities temporarily closed the sandbar area for 48 hours to conduct patrols and assess risk, though no further shark sightings occurred. The incident was reported in regional fishing publications, focusing on the risks associated with solo kayak anglers rather than specific details of the attack. In the aftermath, local authorities emphasized safety procedures for early morning fishing and water activities in areas known for shark presence. Informal advisories were circulated to other anglers and tour operators regarding the risks of unsupervised activity near deep channels and sandbars. It was February 17th, 2016, Neptune Islands, South Australia. A shark cage diving vessel running a scheduled excursion at one of the most well-known great white shark sites in the world. The water was cold and clear. A large great white shark, estimated at around 15 feet, had been circling the cage for the better part of the session, passing within inches of the bars on repeated loops. Elliot Grant was 27. He worked in construction and had booked the trip as part of a group holiday with friends. He had no prior experience with large, predatory sharks. He was not there because of a long-held interest in marine life. He was there because it was on his list of things to do that most people would not. His friends were watching from the deck above. But what started as joking among them gradually turned into a cash dare. By the time the bet was made, it had reached $500. The objective was simple. Open the latch, step outside briefly, come back in. I wonder what they were thinking. A 15-foot great white actively circling, and the dare was to open the door. Before entry, the crew ran a full safety briefing. The rules were explained clearly and physically demonstrated. One rule carried more weight than the others. They were told not to open the cage latch underwater. Keep all body parts inside the cage at all times. The latch was accessible from inside, as was standard for that cage design at the time. Elliot heard the briefing, acknowledged it, and entered the cage. Approximately 20 minutes. Into the dive, the shark was still circling. It had been making close passes for most of the session. Nothing had gone wrong. Elliot reached for the latch and opened it himself, the cage door outward. He leaned his upper body outside into open water. His arm was now fully exposed beyond the cage barrier. The shark was a 15-foot great white that had been circling in actively baited water for the better part of 20 minutes. It was not a passive animal waiting to be observed. The moment Elliot's arm was exposed in open water, the animal responded without delay. The bite was single, immediate, and severe. The jaw closed on the exposed arm with a force that severed major vessels instantly. Blood loss began at a rate that nothing on board could address. The crew above saw the breach as it happened, but could not reach him before contact occurred. They pulled him back through the cage opening and onto the vessel as quickly as the injury allowed. He was on deck within minutes. The vessel was miles from shore. What was available on board was not built for vascular trauma at that level. Emergency services were contacted the moment he was out of the water. The bleeding could not be controlled during the transit. Elliot Grant died on board before the vessel reached land. He was 27 years old. His body was returned home. Post-incident review confirmed that the cage latch had been opened deliberately by Elliot, that the safety briefing had been conducted in full, that the rule had been clearly communicated and physically demonstrated, and that the cage barrier had been functioning correctly before his interference. The operating company replaced the interior accessible latch mechanism with a crew-operated external lock that participants could not reach from inside the cage. No regulatory action was taken against the operator.